The night sky above the war-torn city burned with the orange glow of fire. Smoke twisted upward in black streams, carrying the smell of burnt metal and fear. Buildings that once stood tall were now broken shells. The sound of distant gunfire echoed through the shattered streets. But in the middle of this chaos, one man moved with a purpose. His steps were steady. His breathing was calm. His eyes were locked on a single goal. His name was Darius Holt, a soldier of Earth who had fought in battles across worlds. Tonight was not about victory for his army or glory for his name. Tonight was about one prisoner. Somewhere in the fortress ahead, behind walls of steel and guarded by an army of enemy soldiers, she was waiting. She was not human. She was a fox-eared alien girl from a race the galaxy feared. And she had saved his life once. Now she was the one in chains. The fortress loomed like a mountain of metal in the dark. Tall gates lined with spikes blocked the main path. Guards patrolled in groups, each armed with plasma rifles. Searchlights swept the ground, chasing shadows. Darius crouched behind the wreck of an armored vehicle, his rifle slung across his back. He studied their movements with a hunter's focus. There would be no second chance. One mistake and the cell door would never open for her again. He slipped into the shadows, moving between crumbling walls and piles of debris. Every step brought him closer to the fortress. A guard appeared at the corner ahead, armor shining in the light of a burning building. Darius grabbed the man from behind, pulling him into silence before he could call for help. The body sank to the ground. Darius took his keycard and kept moving. He did not look back. Time was not on his side. Beyond the outer wall, the real fight began. Two soldiers spotted him and raised their rifles. The crack of gunfire split the air. Darius dove behind cover, rolled, and returned fire. Both enemies fell. His chest rose and fell with effort, but his eyes never lost their sharp edge. More soldiers came, their footsteps like thunder in the narrow hallways. Darius fought them all, every shot and strike fueled by the promise he had made to himself. He would reach her cell or die trying. The hall stank of blood and burning energy cores. Sparks rained from broken lights, throwing flashes of white across his path. He passed locked doors where other prisoners whispered in fear. He could hear the clash of boots on metal as more guards closed in. But the thought of her alone, trapped, and maybe believing he had forgotten, pushed him forward. His hands tightened on his weapon. His heart beat like a war drum. A heavy blast door blocked the central corridor. Its surface was thick and scorched from past battles. Darius slammed the stolen keycard into the reader. The door hissed and slid, open just enough for him to slip through. On the other side, a squad of elite guards waited. Their leader smiled as if certain this would be the end. Darius answered with the roar of his rifle. When the smoke cleared, he stood alone among the fallen. Somewhere ahead, muffled voices echoed from the lower levels. He followed the sound, moving faster now. Stairs twisted downward into the heart of the fortress, where the air grew colder. Water dripped from the stone ceiling. The dim lights barely touched the darkness. And then, at the far end of a narrow hallway, he saw an iron-barred cell. Behind those bars, sitting in the shadows, was the girl he had come for. Her golden ears twitched at the sound of his steps. Her eyes lifted, wide with disbelief. And for the first time that night, Darius allowed himself a small, grim smile. The girl's eyes stayed on him as if she could not believe he was real. Her golden ears tilted forward, catching every sound. Her tail, dusty and tangled, twitched. Once in the dim light, she looked thinner than he remembered. The prison had taken its toll on her. Still, the sharpness in her gaze told him she had not given up. Darius stepped closer to the bars. His gloves brushed against the cold iron. The air between them felt heavy, thick with the weight of all that had happened. He had no time for long words. "I'm here," he said simply. Her lips parted, but she did not speak. He could see the trust in her eyes, trust that he would find a way to set her free. The lock was old, but reinforced with alien tech. Darius pulled a small tool from his belt, a device meant for sabotage in the field. Sparks lit the narrow hall. As he worked, the sound was sharp in the silence. Somewhere above, a metal door clanged shut. His mind measured the seconds. Every moment spent here brought more danger. He needed the cell open now. A sudden echo of boots on metal filled the corridor. Shadows moved at the far end. Darius turned, rifle in hand. 3 guards in black armor advanced with weapons ready. He fired first, cutting the lead soldier down. The next 2 scattered, taking cover behind the stone pillars. The hallway became a storm of fire and light. Darius moved like a shadow, hitting each target with cold precision. The last soldier fell. Smoke hung in the air, mixing with the smell of scorched metal. Darius turned back to the cell, his breath heavy but steady. The lock gave a final click. The bars swung inward with a groan. The girl stepped forward, her bare feet light against the cold floor. For a moment, they stood face to face, the chaos of the fortress forgotten. She whispered his name. Her voice was soft, but carried the weight of every lonely hour she had spent here. Darius nodded once and took her hand. "We're leaving," he said. She did not ask how. She did not need to. She had seen the fire in his eyes before, on the battlefield where they had met. That same fire burned now. They moved quickly through the lower halls. Darius kept himself between her and any threat. The narrow corridors twisted like a maze, each turn bringing them closer to the outer gates. Alarms began to wail, a low and pulsing cry that spread through the stone walls. Enemy voices shouted orders above the sound. The fortress was waking to their escape. At a corner, Darius stopped and pressed her against the wall. A patrol of 6 soldiers passed by, their armor clinking in the half-light. He waited, counting each step, feeling her breath quicken beside him. When the sound faded, he pulled her forward. The 2 of them moved like whispers, quick and unseen. But he knew they could not hide for long. Ahead lay a service tunnel, half flooded with water. The air was damp and cold. Metal pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping with condensation. This path would take them under the central yard, away from the heaviest patrols. The girl hesitated, glancing at the dark water. Darius squeezed her hand. "Trust me," he said, and stepped in first. The water reached his knees, sending a chill through his body. They emerged into a storage chamber stacked with crates and fuel cells. The dim light painted long shadows across the floor. Darius guided her toward the far door, but a low hum stopped him. From the shadows stepped a figure taller than any guard they had faced so far. Heavy armor covered him from neck to toe, and in his hands was a massive energy blade that glowed like molten steel. The soldier's visor reflected the light, hiding his eyes. His stance said he was ready to kill before letting them pass. The armored soldier's presence filled the room like a shadow that could not be pushed away. His weapon hummed with deadly energy, each slow movement of the blade leaving a faint trail of light. Darius tightened his grip on his rifle, positioning himself slightly ahead of the girl. The tension between them and their opponent felt like a bowstring drawn to its limit. The soldier stepped forward without a word. His boots rang against the metal floor. The glow from his weapon painted the edges of his armor in orange fire. Darius raised his rifle and fired, but the shot struck the enemy's chestplate and scattered into harmless sparks. The alien warrior kept advancing, each step deliberate and heavy. His voice finally rumbled through the helmet's speaker. "You should not be here, human." Darius did not answer. He slung his rifle aside and drew a short combat blade from his belt. The enemy's size made firearms risky at close range, but a blade could find a gap in the armor. The girl backed toward the wall, her wide eyes locked on the fight. She knew better than to speak. Her silence was her way of trusting him. The clash came like a lightning strike. The soldier swung the glowing blade in a wide arc. Darius ducked low, feeling the heat pass inches from his head. He surged forward, driving his blade toward the gap at the waist armor. The strike hit but only glanced off the protective plates. The enemy responded with a crushing elbow to Darius's shoulder, forcing him back. Pain shot through his arm, but he kept his stance. They circled each other, boots scraping on the metal floor. Darius's breath came faster now, but his eyes stayed fixed on the warrior's movements. Another swing came from above. He stepped aside, letting the blade bite into the floor. Sparks flew upward in a bright shower. In that brief opening, Darius drove his shoulder into the enemy's chest, shoving him back against a stack of crates. The impact knocked a fuel cell loose from the pile. It rolled across the floor, humming with unstable energy. Darius's eyes flicked to it and back to the enemy. He knew what had to be done. As the soldier pushed away from the crates, Darius feigned a retreat toward the fuel cell. The enemy followed, blade raised high. At the last moment, Darius kicked the cell hard toward him and fired a single round. The explosion filled the chamber with blinding light. When the smoke cleared, the soldier lay motionless, armor scorched and cracked. Darius's chest heaved, but he did not waste a second. He moved to the girl and pulled her toward the far door. Her hand trembled in his grip, but her steps were quick. She looked back only once, her ears flat against her head, as if to make sure the threat was truly gone. The corridor beyond the storage room was narrow and dim. Pipes rattled overhead with the rush of steam. Somewhere in the distance, alarms still wailed, but the shouts of soldiers had grown louder. Darius knew the explosion would draw every guard in the fortress to their trail. He needed to find a faster way out before they were surrounded. They turned a corner and found a maintenance lift, its metal doors slightly ajar. Darius forced them open with a grunt, then helped the girl inside. The lift groaned as it carried them upward through the fortress levels. Each second felt longer than the last. The girl stood close to him, her shoulder brushing his arm. Her eyes held both fear and something stronger, a quiet determination that matched his own. The lift stopped with a jolt. The doors opened into a wide balcony overlooking the central yard of the fortress. Below, dozens of soldiers moved in formation, blocking the main gate. Armored vehicles rumbled into position. Darius scanned the area quickly, spotting a narrow service bridge that led to an outer wall. It was a dangerous path, exposed to anyone watching, but it was the only way forward. The wind tore across the balcony, carrying the smell of smoke and the metallic tang of blood. Darius crouched low, pulling the girl beside him. The service bridge stretched ahead, narrow and unguarded for now. Beyond it lay the outer wall and the faint outline of freedom. But the open path also meant they would be easy targets. He scanned the yard below, counting the soldiers and memorizing their patrol rhythm. The girl's gaze followed his, her fox-like ears twitching at every sound. Her breathing was steady now, though her grip on his arm was firm. She was no stranger to danger, but this was different. Here, one mistake could mean capture again or death. Darius leaned close, his voice low. "When we move, stay right behind me. Don't stop no matter what happens." They moved onto the bridge, boots clanging against the metal grating. Below, soldiers shouted to each other, unaware of their presence. The fortress lights swept the yard, beams of white cutting through the dark. Halfway across, a shout went up. A spotlight swung toward them, locking them in its glare. Darius pushed the girl forward, his other hand pulling his rifle free in one smooth motion. Gunfire erupted from the yard. Bullets sparked off the bridge, chipping metal and sending shards flying. Darius returned fire in short, controlled bursts, each shot striking true. The girl ducked low, her hair whipping in the wind as they ran. The bridge swayed under their combined weight, but Darius kept his pace relentless. They were almost at the other side when an explosion roared behind them. The blast shook the bridge, forcing them to drop flat for a moment. Heat washed over them, and a section of the grating behind them twisted upward like torn paper. Darius pulled the girl to her feet and pushed her ahead. The outer wall loomed close now, its surface rough and weathered from years of war. At the base of the wall was a service door, half hidden in shadow. They reached the door as fresh shouts rose from behind. Darius slammed the stolen keycard into the lock, the green light flashing after a tense second. He yanked the door open and pulled her inside. The narrow stairwell beyond spiraled upward, the walls damp and smelling of rust. Their footsteps echoed. As they climbed, the sound almost drowned out by the pounding of his heart. At the top of the stairs, they found themselves on the wall's battlements. The city stretched beyond, dark except for the burning ruins in the distance. Searchlights swept across rooftops, hunting for any sign of intruders. Darius scanned the nearest tower and spotted a small rope ladder hanging down its far side. It was their best chance to get off the wall without being seen. They ran along the battlements, the girl keeping pace beside him. The wind tore at their clothes, and the distant sounds of battle still echoed through the air. A lone guard stepped out from a doorway ahead, his eyes widening in shock. Before he could shout, Darius closed the distance and struck him hard across the head. The man crumpled, and Darius shoved him out of sight. They reached the ladder and began their descent. The rope creaked under their weight, swaying with every movement. The ground below was littered with debris and scattered weapons from earlier fights. The girl touched down first, her feet silent on the cracked pavement. Darius landed beside her, scanning the shadows for movement. The fortress wall rose behind them like a silent threat. They moved into the ruins, using the collapsed buildings as cover. The city streets ahead were a maze of rubble, firelight flickering in the distance. Somewhere out there, a safe route waited, but so did patrols and traps. Darius kept his weapon ready, his ears tuned to every sound. The girl's eyes darted around, sharp and alert, as if she could feel danger closing in. The ruins around them felt like a labyrinth built from shadows and broken stone. Walls leaned at odd angles, and the streets were cracked with jagged edges. Fires burned in the distance, sending waves of heat through the cool night air. Darius led the way, keeping low and using the cover of debris. The girl followed close, her footsteps light but steady. Somewhere behind them, the fortress alarm still howled. They ducked into a half-collapsed building to avoid a passing patrol. Through the shattered windows, Darius watched soldiers sweep the street with flashlights. The beams cut across the rubble, searching every corner. He held the girl back with a hand on her shoulder. The two stayed still, their breathing controlled. The patrol moved on, their voices fading into the night. Once the street was clear, they moved again, slipping between shadows. The air was heavy, with the scent of smoke and ash. Darius's eyes scanned every rooftop and alley, searching for threats. He could feel the weight of the girl's trust pressing against his resolve. He could not fail now, not after coming this far. She had risked her life for him once, and tonight he was returning that debt. A faint sound reached his ears, a soft metallic clink from behind. He turned sharply, weapon raised. 3 soldiers emerged from the darkness, their rifles all ready. Aimed, the leader barked an order, and the others spread out to block escape. Darius shoved the girl behind a wall and fired first. His shots dropped one soldier, but the other 2 pressed forward, forcing him to retreat deeper into the ruins. The firefight was brutal in the close space. Sparks leapt from the walls as bullets struck stone. Darius weaved between cover, his movements sharp and efficient. One soldier fell to a burst of fire, leaving the leader alone. The man charged forward, swinging his rifle like a club. Darius caught the strike with his forearm, pain lancing through the muscle, but he countered with a punch to the jaw that sent the soldier sprawling. The girl stepped from behind the wall, her eyes scanning the street for more enemies. Darius nodded to her, and they moved on quickly. The city was too dangerous to linger in one place. Every second without movement gave the fortress more time to tighten its net. Somewhere beyond these ruins was the safe zone, where Earth forces still held control. But the path was far from certain. They came upon an old bridge spanning a dried riverbed. The wooden planks were cracked and rotting, but it was the fastest way forward. Darius tested the first step, and the wood groaned under his weight. He motioned for the girl to follow closely. The bridge swayed with every step, the sound of splintering wood echoing in the emptiness below. Halfway across, a faint glint caught Darius's eye tripwires. He froze, signaling her to stop. A small explosive was rigged under one of the planks. Ahead, moving carefully, he stepped over it, guiding her to do the same. Once past the trap, they quickened their pace to the other side. Darius knew the wires meant the enemy was expecting someone to come this way. That meant they were getting close to the outer defenses. The far end of the bridge opened into a narrow street lined with abandoned market stalls. Torn cloth fluttered from broken poles, and crates lay scattered across the ground. The girl's ears twitched at a distant rumble. Moments later, a convoy of armored vehicles rolled into view from the far street. Darius pulled her into a stall, crouching low as the machines passed. The rumble faded, but the threat was far from over. They pushed forward, turning into a wider road that led toward the city's edge. The sound of engines and marching boots echoed behind them. Darius could feel the hunt closing in again. His mind mapped the streets ahead, choosing a route that offered both speed and cover. The girl stayed at his side, her expression calm but ready. Together, they moved like shadows through the dying city. The road ahead stretched toward the outer edge of the city, but every step felt heavier. The air was colder here, carrying the smell of the open fields beyond the walls. Darius slowed his pace, scanning the rooftops and alleys for movement. The girl's sharp ears flicked at each sound, her senses catching what his could not. Somewhere close, the enemy was waiting. They reached a crumbling statue at the center of an abandoned square. Its shadow gave them cover for a moment. Darius crouched and checked his remaining ammunition. The fight through the fortress had cost him most of his supplies. He had only a few full magazines left. The girl knelt beside him, her golden hair falling forward as she whispered that she could hear boots approaching fast. Darius rose and motioned for her to follow him toward a side street. The narrow path wound between burned-out buildings and piles of rubble. They moved quickly, but the sound of pursuit grew louder. Orders were being shouted, and the metallic clang of weapons echoed through the night. The enemy was driving them toward a choke point, and Darius knew it. At the end of the street, they found the barrier. A wall of debris blocked their path, stacked high with twisted beams and broken stone. The only way forward was to climb. Darius boosted the girl upward first, his hands steady despite the strain in his muscles. She reached the top and turned to pull him up. Behind them, figures appeared in the darkness, rifles raised. Darius hit the top of the debris wall and rolled to his feet, pulling the girl into a run. Gunfire erupted, striking sparks from the rubble as they darted into another street. He returned. Fire in short bursts, forcing the soldiers to take cover. The space ahead opened into an old train yard, the rusting hulks of cargo cars scattered across the ground like silent sentinels. They weaved between the metal giants, using them as shields. The air smelled of rust and damp earth. Somewhere in the distance, the faint hum of an engine reached Darius's ears. It was not the enemy, it was an Earth transport. Hope flared in his chest, but it was quickly tempered by the reality that they were not alone here. A fresh squad of enemy soldiers blocked the far exit. The squad advanced in tight formation, their weapons leveled. Darius pushed the girl behind an overturned car and leaned out to fire. The first 2 soldiers fell, but the rest kept coming. The sound of his rifle echoed across the yard, each shot a promise that he would not stop. The girl stayed hidden, but her eyes followed every move he made. A grenade clattered across the ground toward him. Darius kicked it away, the blast shaking the ground as it went off between 2 cars. The shockwave rattled the metal, and smoke drifted through the narrow spaces. Using the cover, Darius closed the distance and struck down another soldier with his blade. The last enemy tried to retreat, but a well-placed shot ended the fight. They reached the far gate of the train yard, only to find it chained shut. Darius smashed the lock with the butt of his rifle and swung the gate open. Beyond lay a wide stretch of open ground leading to the city's outer boundary. The sound of the transport engine was louder now. If they could cross the field before the next patrol arrived, they would make it to safety. The girl looked at him, her expression fierce despite her exhaustion. She nodded once, ready to run. Darius took a deep breath, scanning the shadows one last time. Then they stepped into the open, their pace quick and unyielding. The night air rushed around them, carrying the distant lights of freedom closer with every step. The field stretched before them, wide and silent under the pale glow of the moon. Broken fences and scattered debris marked the scars of old battles. Darius moved first, keeping his rifle raised as his eyes swept every shadow. The girl stayed close behind, her steps quick but careful. Every heartbeat felt heavier than the last, knowing the fortress was still within striking distance. Halfway across the field, movement flickered at the edge of Darius's vision. Figures emerged from the darkness, spreading out in a wide line. The enemy had set an ambush. Flashlights cut through the night, and orders rang out in a harsh, alien tongue. Darius pushed the girl behind a rusted barricade, then took position to return fire. The first shots cracked across the field, and the air was instantly filled with the thunder of combat. Bullets struck the barricade, splintering metal and kicking up dirt. Darius leaned out, firing in short bursts that dropped the first wave of attackers. The girl stayed low, her hands gripping the edge of the barrier. Her ears twitched with every sound, tracking the enemy's movements. More soldiers poured in from the left flank, trying to box them in. Darius shifted position, refusing to be pinned down. A sudden burst from an enemy rifle grazed his arm, tearing through the fabric of his sleeve. Pain flared, but he gritted his teeth and kept firing. He knew he could not afford to slow down now. The enemy was disciplined, moving in coordinated patterns. He would need to break their line before they fully closed the circle. His eyes scanned the terrain for an opening. Near the far edge of the field, a supply truck sat abandoned. Its side hatch was open, and crates were stacked around it. Darius spotted a fuel drum lying on its side, its surface dented and leaking. He aimed low and fired, the drum erupting into a wave of fire that rolled across the ground. The sudden blaze forced the soldiers to scatter, breaking their formation and buying precious seconds. He called to the girl, and they sprinted toward the gap. Her speed surprised him, light and swift even after the long escape. The gunfire behind them grew more distant, though stray shots still whistled past. The fire's glow painted the scene in shades of gold and red, their shadows stretching across the torn earth as they ran. The transport engine's hum was louder now. Just beyond a small ridge, they crested the ridge and saw a battered but functional Earth military transport, its rear hatch open. 2 human soldiers waved them forward, weapons ready to cover their retreat. Darius urged the girl ahead, firing one last burst toward the enemy line. The soldiers returned fire, forcing the attackers to keep their distance. The smell of burning fuel lingered in the air, mixing with the dust kicked up by their boots. The girl reached the transport first and scrambled inside. One of the soldiers pulled her in and checked her for injuries. Darius followed, diving into the vehicle as another burst of enemy fire rattled against the hull. The driver shouted that they were moving, and the transport lurched forward. The sudden motion almost threw Darius off balance, but he braced himself and checked that the hatch was sealed. Through the narrow viewing slit, he saw the field falling away behind them. The fortress walls were still lit by the glow of alarms and fires, but the enemy was shrinking into the distance. The girl sat across from him, her eyes locked on his face. In that look was gratitude, relief, and the unspoken weight of everything. They had just survived. He gave her a single nod, knowing words were not needed. The transport roared into the open plains beyond the city. The night air rushing through the vents was cold but clean, a sharp contrast to the stifling heat of the fortress. The girl leaned back, her shoulders finally relaxing. Darius kept his weapon across his knees, eyes still scanning the horizon. The mission was not over yet, but the hardest part was behind them. The transport sped across the open plains, its heavy wheels kicking up trails of dust under the moonlight. Inside, the hum of the engine filled the silence between them. Darius sat with his back against the cold metal wall, his rifle still across his knees. The girl sat opposite him, watching him with a gaze that held both relief and unspoken questions. One of the human soldiers in the transport looked at Darius with open curiosity. "You went into that fortress alone," he said. "For her?" Darius met his eyes for only a moment before nodding. Words felt unnecessary. The soldier gave a low whistle and turned back toward the front. The girl's ears twitched slightly at the exchange, but she said nothing. The transport rattled as it crossed uneven ground. In the distance, the glow of the fortress lights faded, replaced by the deep darkness of the wilderness. Darius allowed himself to finally ease his shoulders. The girl mirrored his movement, letting the tension slip from her frame. Her tail shifted slightly, curling over her legs for warmth. For the first time in days, she looked at peace, but the mission was not yet truly over. They were still far from the safe zone, and the wilderness between here and there was unforgiving. Enemy scouts often roamed these lands, seeking stragglers or escapees. Darius knew they would have to stay alert. He reached into a pack and pulled out a canteen, offering it to her. She accepted it with both hands, drinking slowly before passing it back. The driver called out that they were approaching a checkpoint. Lights ahead cut across the road, marking the defensive line of Earth's forward outpost. Human soldiers stood, ready with weapons raised until they recognized the markings on the transport. The vehicle slowed, then passed through the gates without issue. Inside the checkpoint walls, the air felt heavier but safer somehow. When the transport stopped, Darius helped the girl down. Her bare feet touched solid ground, and she looked around at the human soldiers moving about their duties. They stared back at her with a mixture of curiosity and respect. Whispers spread quickly about who she was and how far Darius had gone to bring her here. But no one stepped forward to ask questions yet. They were led into a small command tent where a senior officer waited. His uniform was crisp despite the dust in the air, and his sharp eyes studied them both. He asked for a report, and Darius gave it in brief, leaving out no detail of the fight through the fortress. The officer listened in silence, then finally nodded. "You've done more than anyone could have asked, soldier." The girl stepped forward then, speaking in her own language. Her voice was soft yet steady, and though most could not understand her words, the emotion in them was unmistakable. She placed a hand lightly on Darius's arm and bowed her head. In that simple act, she gave him more thanks than any medal could. The officer watched with a faint smile before dismissing them. Outside the tent, the campfires burned low, casting warm light over the dusty ground. The girl stayed close to Darius as they walked, her head tilting up to watch the stars overhead. She spoke quietly, telling him that when she had been in the cell, she thought she would never see the sky again. Now every star felt like a promise of freedom. Darius looked at her for a moment, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. He knew the war was far from over. There would be other battles, other dangers. But tonight she was safe, and that was enough. He guided her toward the barracks, where she would rest, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together.